Hello everybody, so now we're going to learn about methods in Java. So let's create a new project in IntelliJ, let's call it methods. Let's add some sample code and press create. Now we've got our IntelliJ window here. If any of this looks unfamiliar, please go to the start of this series where we set all this up using IntelliJ and Java 21. I'd also recommend going and looking at the basics of Java in the previous tutorials in this series before going on to things like methods. So yeah, let's create another class that's going to house our methods in, and we'll call this, calculator, right? So we're just creating a standard object called calculator that is going to have a set of functions, right? So you know how objects will have characteristics and behaviors. This object isn't going to have any characteristics, we'll just create some behaviors. So behaviors. So this is like an abstraction for a calculator. We're going to basically create the different functions that a calculator can carry out using Java methods. And this will allow us to learn how methods work, the different parts of a Java method, and why they're useful. So let's think about the different things that a calculator can do. We can add two numbers. We can subtract two numbers. We can divide two numbers. And we can multiply two numbers. We don't have to repeat it for all of these, so let's just do add and subtract because the fundamentals are really just the same. We're learning about methods here rather than actual calculations. So here's how we create a method in Java. So we go like this, public, and then we've got to think, what do we want to return from this method? What is this function going to output, right? So let's say we have, 1 plus 1, right? That is going to equal 2. This sort of expression here combines two inputs, right? Imagine this is like a little function machine. Combines two inputs and provides an output. Now that output could be nothing. It could be a number. It could be a string. It could be a Boolean. It truly doesn't matter. But in this case, with our calculator, we want a number. Let's just say 7. Even though 1 plus 1 isn't 7, but the concept of input and output is really prevalent in methods or functions, as they might call them in other languages. 1 plus 1 is obviously 2. This public keyword, we'll go over scopes and the public keyword and things like that, what this means in a later video. But for now, we're just going to put that there, and you can learn about that later on in the series. So what we're returning is an integer. So we're going to go int. So public and then int. And then we'll go add. And this is going to be the name of our function. So as we're adding two numbers, we want to call this add. That's how we're going to reference it elsewhere. Cool, so now we're going to put two brackets. And inside these brackets is where our inputs are going to go. We call these parameters. So we have two inputs here, number 1 and number 2. And those are both going to be integers, so we'll say int num1, then comma. Then we put the next one, int num2. So we've declared that we have an add method that is going to return an integer, and it has public access, but again, we don't need to go over that now. And that takes in these two inputs. We could have, 3, 4 inputs if we want. We could go in num3, in num4. It really doesn't matter, but for the sake of this function, we're only going to add 2 together. So if our input's here, and then this is going to be our output, which is an integer. So now we want to go curly bracket, enter. Then here is where we write the logic for this function, right? So all of the logic that goes in this function has to be between these two curly brackets here. So obviously the logic for adding two numbers is very, very simple. You know, we add the two numbers and we get the result, and then we can just output the result from this function. So let's just add two integers together. We've done that before in this series. So if we go int result equals, we'll create a variable called result, and we'll have that equal to num1, which is passed in this function here as an input, space plus space num2. Remember the semicolon after every line, obviously apart from these curly bracket lines, every line within the body. Now we have our result calculated here and stored, which is good, but now we want to sort of push it out of this function. We want to return it. So we just go like return, and then we reference that result variable. So go result, semicolon. And that's it. That is how you write a Java method. Now, obviously, we've got two lines here. Some of you may have realized that actually we can just return num1 space plus space num2. And now we can actually get rid of this line because we don't need to store the result. We're just outputting the result. Just like that. And that is our function for adding two numbers together. It's a very simple function. We could write much more logic in between the top of this function and the return statement, but that depends on what the function is wanting to do. So function method, same type of thing. You can use either word to describe some functionality or a method that does something. So this is a Java method right here. Now, let's do the same thing for subtraction. So we'll go public int subtract. Right, so the name, and then our parameters, which is going to be int num1, comma int num2, and then curly brackets. This is where we put the content of the subtract function. Now let's go return num1 minus num2. And that will be the functionality for this subtract method. So now let's consume these methods, right? So we have our class calculator here, which is separate from the main, but we're not actually using it yet. So now let's go into main. Let's delete all this stuff, make some space. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create an instance of a calculator. So we'll just sort of spawn a calculator in. And then we'll test adding two numbers and subtracting two numbers. So we're just going to run the functions that are on this instance of a calculator. So let's first create a new calculator. So we're creating a variable, so we go the type, which is calculator. Then we'll name it our calculator. You can name this whatever you want. Space equals space, new calculator. We'll also put the semicolon after every line. So we've got this instance of our calculator. Now let's actually use it to perform a function. And that function is going to be adding. And to perform that functionality, we want to consume this method here, the add method, which returns an integer. So let's run that method by going our calculator dot, and then we access all of the fields and methods that belong to the calculator, which include add, subtract. Ignore all this stuff for now. We want to go dot add. And then we want to put our inputs between these two brackets. So that's our num1 and num2. So for example, we'll go 1, comma 1. Semicolon at the end of every line. And there we go. That is how we use a Java method. So if you press Control or Command, whether you're on Windows or Mac, and then click on Add, you can see it takes us to this method here. And we can see that this is what the method does. this is what it takes in, this is what it returns, and this is what the name of the method is. So obviously if we run this, right, it works, but we don't see any output. Now obviously that's because all we've done is returned here. We haven't printed out anything, either here or there. We've just sort of ran it. And that's run on our computer, but we can't see the result of that. So we can now print out the result of this, which is what this returns. So now, for a new line, let's go system.out.println, or we can use that shortcut, really useful shortcut called SOUT, all lowercase, then press enter. Then we can go our calculator.add, put in any number you want as two inputs. So let's go 3, 4, or 5. Obviously 3 plus 5 is 8. We can get rid of this line above because we're not doing anything with that value. Now let's run it again, and hopefully we'll get the result of 3 plus 5, which is 8, which I think is correct. Pretty sure it's correct, guys. So that is how we create a method and how we consume a method. The words function and method are kind of synonymous, but in Java we call them methods because they are part of an object. Now, let's just copy this and do the same thing for subtracting, except for we only really need to change one thing, and that is this bit here, what we're running. So we're going, instead of rCalculator.add, we'll go rCalculator.subtract. And our two inputs are here. Now, obviously 3 minus 5 is going to create a negative, but let's run that and see. Cool, 8 and negative 2. Now let's go 5 and 5. That should be 0. Okay, cool. So hopefully now you guys understand methods in Java and how to create them and how to consume them. If you guys have any questions, please comment below. And yeah, see you in the next one.